Yeah, so let us look at respiration and glycolysis. We want to see what respiration is, the types of respiration, what are the advantages of having any of the types of respiration, and what are the limitations for any of the two types of respiration that we shall see. And then from there, we shall look at the stages of respiration. That's when we'll introduce in glycolysis, and we'll basically look at what glycolysis is, where it takes place, what are the steps of glycolysis or the stages of glycolysis, and then the end products of glycolysis. So that is going to be our presentation now. Okay. So living organisms do respire. It's one of the characteristics of living organisms. That respiration is basically the process of oxidizing food substances to release energy as ATP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate, say nitrogen base plus 3 phosphate groups, and that is the form of energy that living organisms actually use. So the process of generating this ATP is what you call respiration, and that ATP is generated from the food that living organisms take. That's why we are saying food substances. Okay. So respiration can occur in presence of oxygen or in absence of oxygen. When it is in presence of oxygen, we say it is aerobic respiration. When it is in absence of oxygen, we say it is anaerobic respiration. Okay, so the organisms that need the oxygen for respiration, we call them aerobes or aerobic organisms. And then anaerobic organisms are those that can survive without oxygen. And then we also use terms like obligate aerobe. When we say obligate aerobic organism or obligate aerobes, we are referring to organisms that really need oxygen, and without oxygen they can't survive. So they are obligate. And then facultative aerobic organisms, it means that they can stay in presence of oxygen or in absence of oxygen. So those are terms that you can note there. The key point is that when you have oxygen, you get more ATP molecules. That means more energy. And if you don't have oxygen, you get the energy, but it will not be more. And then aerobic respiration, of course, happens in the mitochondria. So the process, of course, like we shall see, we have glycolysis, which takes place in this cytosol, and then the other cyclic cycle and the electron transport system, or what we call oxidative phosphorylation, happen in the mitochondria. Okay, so the key differences: aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic, you need oxygen, and anaerobic, you don't need. You produce more energy when you have oxygen, and you produce less energy when you have no oxygen, so less ATP. And then aerobic definitely starts from the cytosol and then into the mitochondria. For anaerobic, only in the cytosol, or what we call the cytoplasm. So the process of respiration involves a number of reactions. Okay, these reactions can be grouped into 3: glycolytic reactions of glycolysis, Krebs cycle, what we call citric cycle, and then oxidative phosphorylation, what we can also call the electron transport system. So those are the 3 main stages of respiration. This is to say that for each step, you have a series of reactions that are happening each stage. Okay. So we earlier on mentioned about the food substrates or the food substances. The breakdown or the oxidation of these food substances primarily we break down carbohydrates, so basically glucose, but that doesn't mean that fats and also proteins cannot be broken down. Okay, so the amount of energy released varies whether you are breaking down carbohydrates or lipids or proteins, and we shall see which one actually produces more. End product usually of respiration, you have energy, you have mentioned it several times, but you also have carbon dioxide and water. Okay, so the mitochondria plays an important role. It is an organelle within the cell, and it is what we often term as the powerhouse of the cell. So this slide here illustrates that we produce more energy from lipids and then more energy from proteins, but less from carbohydrates. But definitely the body primarily uses carbohydrates for generating energy. The lipids are producing more energy. Why? Because of the higher hydrogen content in the lipids compared to the other biomolecules, the lipids, the carbohydrates and the proteins. Okay, so when we ask you which one gives more energy, you definitely the lipids. So what happens if we break down carbohydrates? The carbohydrates have to be broken down into the simplest form, which is usually glucose. So glucose is usually metabolized. But that is not to say that other monosaccharides, for example, fructose, cannot be metabolized. Okay, cannot be broken down to release it. Okay, so the complex carbohydrates have to be broken into monosaccharides. They are monomers. And therefore, we have polysaccharides being broken into disaccharides and then finally into monosaccharides. So the process of breaking them down into their constituent molecules or components, or what you call monomers, that process is hydrolysis. Okay, you use water in that process. Okay, so you can also break down lipids. Like we say, the lipids yield more energy. Okay, and the hydrolysis of lipids definitely give you what makes up the lipids, and those are fatty acids and glycerol. And then these are the components that enter the respiratory pathway. Okay, when we talk about the respiratory pathway, we are referring to glycolysis, Krebs cycle, or what we call the citric cycle, and then the oxidative phosphorylation. So we shall see where actually these enter into the Krebs cycle, or in the glycolytic cycle, or even with oxidative phosphorylation. We shall see how we enter into that. So proteins are the last resort. That means if you've exhausted carbohydrates, lipids, then you are left with proteins. So definitely for the proteins to be utilized, they have to be broken down into their building units that we call the amino acids. That means that the amino acids now have to be what you call deaminated. The amino group has to be removed before they enter Krebs cycle. So here you can see where the proteins enter the respiratory pathway. Enters at the level of Krebs cycle or the citric cycle. So what are the reactions that happen in respiration? Definitely there are two major types. The word major is very important. This is not to mean that for you to break down glucose into energy and carbon dioxide and water, that you only need oxidation and decarboxylation. No. There are several oxidation reactions. There are several decarboxylation reactions. Basically, we're saying that all these reactions can be categorized into oxidation and decarboxylation. Oxidation, in this case, is when you remove hydrogen from a compound, that is oxidation, and then carboxylation. Decarboxylation. Decarboxylation means the removal of the carbon from the compound, and this carbon usually can contribute